Testing. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. That was very loud. No. Testing 1, 2, 3. Is there some problem with? Is everything set up? Okay, so we're ready to start. I think the volume of this can be lowered. The Shangyan Taida. Yo. Shall we sha? To make it a little lower? Is that correct? Yes. Boy, is that correct? Shall we sha? Shall we dian? Yeah, isha is an action, continuing action. Shall we dian? Shall we dian? 我见一点，增见 right? 笑 Okay. 我们开始吧。Oh, we start. Okay, so we'll begin with the line of homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. And today is April 13th, 2019. And so we're continuing our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya, the book of the threes. And now we come to Sutta number 69. This is another one on the three unwholesome and wholesome roots. So you see that we've had a series of suttas on the roots. 68 is on the roots, 69 is on the roots, and it seems almost as though 70 was inserted in here a little bit arbitrarily, because 71 and 72 continue on the three unwholesome roots. But we'll follow the sequence that has come down. Okay, so now 69 is called simply roots. And so it begins with the three unwholesome roots. So what are the three unwholesome roots? Greed, hatred, delusion. This we've come across again and again, so we don't need explanation. And then the Buddha, so this is the Udesa, that is the short presentation, sort of the opening salvo, so to speak. So now comes the Nidesa, the elaboration. So the text says, whatever greed occurs is unwholesome. Okay, so greed, according to the Buddha, is always unwholesome. You know, we can say that there's wholesome varieties of greed. Of course, there are different degrees of greed. So somebody, for example, is greedy, who they're hungry and then they're greedy and they enjoy delicious food. That's one kind of greed. It's still a kind of greed, the greed to go on eating the delicious food, or for variety of tastes. So every day, as I've often pointed out, when I was living in Sri Lanka, every day Sri Lankan food, and then sometimes I even had dreams at night of finding myself in Chinatown and looking around and 7 or 8 different Chinese restaurants and wondering which restaurant should we go to. And then when I would wake up, I would think, wow, it would be so great to have Chinese food here in Sri Lanka. But maybe in Colombo there was a Chinese restaurant, but in Kandy at that time, where I was living in Kandy, no, none that I knew of. Okay, so now I'm in Chinese monastery, so every day Chinese food, except once in a while some Sri Lankan supporters would bring Sri Lankan food, and then when they're put out on the table, some dishes of the regular Chinese food, some dishes brought by the Sri Lankan supporters with the Sri Lankan food. Which food do I go for? The Sri Lankan food. Okay, so that's, you can say, Bhante is being greedy. Yeah, and I admit that's the kind of greed. If I were completely beyond greed, I would just go for an even balance of whatever is on the table. I would take some of the Sri Lankan food, some of the Chinese food, in even measure. Okay, so I'm not perfect in that respect. But then, that's a kind of greed, and it's unwholesome. But there's another kind of greed, or another degree of greed, which is really, the terrible kind of greed, where you take these multimillionaires and billionaires who are not satisfied with what they have. They're knocking out rival business corporations in order to take over the market for themselves. They exploit poor people in the traditional countries of the world in order to get to pay low prices for the acquisition of raw materials, or else setting up factories in these so-called third world countries and exploiting people to work at bare survival wages so that they can make bigger profit margins. So that's another kind of greed. Not to speak of weapons manufacturers, poison manufacturers, advertising agents that promote unhealthy, unwholesome products. So that is a much heavier, more serious type of greed. Okay, so greed, whatever greed occurs, in any degree, it's unwholesome. But there are kinds of greeds that are, degrees of greed that are sort of normally acceptable in everyday life. And then there are types of greeds that create great harm and suffering for others. Okay, so then, whatever deed a greedy person performs by way of body, speech, and mind, that is also unwholesome. So we have greed as called a mula, which means a root. And as a root, we could say that greed is let me just open. Okay, so greed as a root. It's the root for other mental states that are also unwholesome. And it's also a root for bodily, verbal, and mental actions. Okay, so what are some other mental states that stem directly from greed? With greed as the root. Well, craving and greed are almost synonymous. But if we're following the Abhidhamma system, then we should know what are the states that are the defilements that are sort of directly connected with greed. Miserliness? Actually, what's interesting, according to the Abhidhamma system, miserliness is rooted in hatred. So it seems to me that both greed and hatred combine in miserliness. But the Abhidhamma mentions two mental factors that are strongly connected with greed. The selfishness is almost another word for miserliness. But if you remember the Abhidhamma system, the Chaitasikas, what? We need the other microphone. Well, Vitakka and Vichara are variable states. They can go from unwholesome, or they can be wholesome, but there are two kilesas, two defilements that are strongly connected with greed, according to the Abhidhamma system. Yeah. Lust is and greed are different words for the same factor. No, those are the other unwholesome roots. Okay, I have to tell then. Last chance to get a star on your report card. Okay, so these are views, and the other is conceit, ditthi and mana. Because according to the Abhidhamma, views are formulated out of a craving either to justify craving for sense pleasures, or especially the craving for existence, for eternal existence. Okay, the question, so let her take the microphone so that the question gets recorded.
Is views also part of delusion?
We can say that all unwholesome qualities have delusion as a root. So views are also rooted in delusion, but in the Abhidhamma system, views are specifically connected with greed. Of course, delusion is there as well. Delusion is always present along with greed and hatred. Yeah. No, greed is also a Chaitasika. The citta is the state of consciousness, but the state of consciousness is accompanied by, or the state of consciousness, it's accompanied by a multiplicity of mental factors, the Chaitasikas. And so in the Abhidhamma system, the cittas rooted in greed are distinguished between whether they are accompanied by views, and then some that are not accompanied by views are accompanied by conceit. Because conceit is some way an expression of an attachment to oneself, to the idea of one's superiority. Yeah. No, view here is when the word view is mentioned as a factor connected with greed, it's always a wrong view. The right view is not connected with greed, but it's dissociated. Right view is dissociated from greed. Yeah, Kenneth?
Bhante, can you explain what conceit is exactly? Like what conceit means?
Okay, let us take the kinds of conceit. Maybe that will illustrate what conceit is. Well, let us say at the most basic level, conceit is a ranking of oneself in relation to others, sort of rooted in a clinging to the idea of I. In the background, there's a clinging to the idea of I, and then on the basis of that clinging or grasping of the idea of I, one then rates oneself in relation to others as being either I am better, I am the same, or I am inferior. 3 kinds of conceit. Okay, and then we have, rooted in greed, various kinds of bodily, verbal, and mental actions. So easy to think what examples of these bodily, verbal, and mental actions are. We don't have to go into them now. Okay, whoops. Then hatred is a root, and it is a root for other mental states. And according to the Abhidhamma system, there are a number of defilements that are rooted in hatred. So what are some of these mental states rooted in hatred? In dosa. Okay, we can say anger. Though actually, this is where in a sense, a little disagreement with the Abhidhamma system, that it classifies anger as a form of hatred. But it seems to me that there's a difference between anger and hatred, even though they have a similar feature in being a kind of resistance or rejection of the object. But I could say that I get angry with somebody, even though that person is my friend, but if the person does something I don't like, I get angry with him. Or if the weather is miserable, I get angry with the weather. But I don't hate, in ordinary English terminology, though I get angry with my friend, I don't hate my friend. Maybe I love that friend, but if they do something that's annoying to me, then I get angry. And similarly with things like unpleasant weather, I get angry with it. Or a lot of mosquitoes come and I don't have a mosquito net, then I get angry with the mosquitoes. But I don't hate the mosquitoes. Well, maybe I do. but not on a personal level. So anger, but let's take some other defilements which are not in any way synonymous with hatred. We need the microphone.
Sorrow, sadness.
Sadness.
Sorrow.
Sadness is really a feeling.
Sorrow.
Sorrow.
Because whenever I feel sorrowful, sad, my Abhidhamma friend kept telling me that you have hatred-rooted mentality right now.
Yeah, but what I would say is that sadness or sorrow are feelings. They're Vedana rather than mental factors. Of course, feeling is a mental factor too, but I'm thinking of specific defilements. Actually, that's a good point, though cruelty isn't included, strangely, it's not included in the Abhidhamma as a mental factor, but we could say.
How about antagonism?
Antagonism is almost just another English word for hatred.
Hostility?
Okay, this is, Johnny came up with one. You weren't cheating, were you?
It just happened I watched your Abhidhamma 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay, so that's not cheating. What I mean is putting your cell phone under the table and sort of flipping through the cell phone. Okay, and then Bhante Mangala came up with one a few minutes ago. Envy, the other one, miserliness. Of course, what is envy? It's the feeling of resentment. Say if somebody accomplishes something that you couldn't accomplish, or somebody acquires something desirable that you didn't acquire. So that is a kind of resentment comes up, a displeasure, and that is an offshoot of hatred. It's not the same. And then miserliness, this is the Abhidhamma way of explanation, is not desiring or a resistance to sharing one's good fortune with others. Though again, it seems to me that this is a combination of greed and hatred. Drea, did you have your hand up? How about killing is an action that comes from hatred, but we're talking now just about mental qualities. Blaming.
Ridicule.
That's an action, not a mental state.
Blaming, you said?
She said blaming, yeah.
Blaming. Blaming is a verbal action.
But mental, you can blame. We always in the mind.
I say blaming in the mind. That's actually a good point. Yeah, it's actually a good point.
But that's still a verbal action.
No, actually has a
Even
good point that in the
Really?
mind there can be the attitude of blaming. Yeah,
Yeah,
even
there
though-
can be,
Yeah.
but isn't there?
Yeah, then it often expresses in speech.
But isn't that still considered verbal action? It's still an action, in a sense. Even
Yeah,
though
but if it's not expressed verbally, then it's not yet a verbal action. I don't
Anyway,
know.
I wanted to come up with a mental state, but I guess nobody cares. So I don't know if this is in the Abhidhamma.
Okay.
But it does strike me that fear.
Actually, this is a good point, or let's say it's a puzzling point.
Fear and hatred go together. Think about it. It may not be in the Abhidhamma, but that's
Yeah,
just
it's
what
not in the
I've
Abhidhamma.
observed in my life.
But let us say certain kinds of fear. Because there are texts which speak about, there's the fear of committing unwholesome deeds. This is ottappa, fear of the consequences. So that is considered a wholesome quality. So certain kinds of fear. Okay. Anyway, we'll take one more. We don't have to go through a whole catalog. Or two more. I saw another hand. Okay, Ken and then Neil, is that? Okay.
Bhante, I was wondering, would something like irritation?
Like irritation?
Yes. Wouldn't that?
Irritation,
I mean, it's very minor, I would say, but
yeah.
isn't it based
Okay,
on it?
irritation is actually almost the same as, it's sort of like the precursor of anger.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, but let's put it anyway. And
Jealousy, maybe?
actually, that is a good point, because even though I think the Abhidhamma system subsumes jealousy under envy, but I think in human experience, there's a difference between jealousy and envy, though they're closely associated. Like envy, it's resenting that somebody has some kind of success, achievement, praise, honor, wealth that one doesn't have. Whereas jealousy pertains to people relationships. So the man sees his girlfriend talking. In fact, there's a description of this in the suttas, very Majjhima Nikaya Sutta 101. The man sees his girlfriend chatting with another man, laughing, smiling, exchanging sort of smiling expressions with each other, and then there arises jealousy. It's somewhat different from envy, so we'll put that down here. Okay, I think that's enough. Okay, and then also out of hatred, we have we have bodily, verbal, and mental actions. Okay, then the third root is delusion. And delusion is said to be the root of all unwholesome mental qualities. So delusion is the root also of greed and hatred. So greed and hatred themselves are always rooted in delusion. And then what are some other defilements? And then we could say all of these defilements that are rooted in greed and hatred are also rooted in delusion. But what are some defilements that are more closely connected with delusion? I think the Abhidhamma mentions only two that are specifically connected with delusion.
Wrong views, Bhante?
You know, it seems to me that wrong view has it's not one of those two, but I'd say, because it's a way of understanding things, of interpreting things, I would say that wrong view has a very strong connection with delusion.
Craving?
Well, craving and greed are considered synonymous in the Abhidhamma. So these two, you would have to know the Abhidhamma system to be able to guess these correctly. Okay, yeah. So one of these is doubt. So this is specifically doubt about the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Not the kind of doubt, if somebody makes some statement about quantum physics, and then you doubt that person's ability to pontificate because he doesn't have any background in physics. So maybe he doesn't know what he's talking about, so you doubt his statement. That's not what's meant here. But this is doubt regarding, let's say, the principles of the Dhamma. Okay, delusion, doubt, and there's another one again. This is very subtle that you have to know. Okay, yeah, so use the word agitation. Usually I translate this as restlessness, so it's udacha. Okay, so these are enough to give some idea of how greed, hatred, and delusion are the roots not only of unwholesome action, but also they're the roots of a multiplicity of other defilements. And then if you go just out of personal interest, you could look in Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 7, called the simile of the cloth. There you find 16 defilements of the mind are mentioned. And amongst them is greed, hatred. I don't remember, is delusion mentioned there? I don't remember. But you find a whole list of defilements which involve some, I would say, many of these involve some kind of admixture of greed and hatred. And of course, delusion is there. Okay, so now continuing, this is where the sutta differs from other suttas and is maybe quite unique. So it says that when a greedy person, overcome by greed, with the mind obsessed by greed, inflicts suffering upon another person, under a false pretext. Wow, this is so contemporary. By killing, imprisonment, confiscation, censor, or banishment, thinking, I am powerful, I want power, that too is unwholesome. Okay, so the word, here it's translated under a false pretext. So that's a bit of interpretation. Since the word, the actual Pali word that's used is simply asatta, which could be treated simply as an adverb falsely. Okay, so we have a person who inflicts suffering upon another under a false pretext or on some false grounds. And so through greed, one could inflict suffering on the other by killing that person. You know, we see this in regimes in which there's a person greedy for power, obsessed with power. He'll kill his rivals for the position. We see this in many Latin American countries where somebody comes to be a dictator, or they rise to power, and then they'll kill their rivals, or they'll kill journalists who might challenge their authoritarian moves to establish, unilateral control over the country. Or they'll imprison their rivals arbitrarily with long prison sentences, often under false pretexts. They'll confiscate their wealth, censor them, maybe formally get the government to censor them, or banish them, expel them from the country. And then sort of the driving force here, very unusual expressions in this sutta, is So balava, bala is power. And of course there are good types of bala, good types of power, like the Buddha speaks of the 5 spiritual powers: faith, energy, mindfulness, samadhi, and wisdom. But this is a desire for, you say, power over other people, control over a system of government, control over other people, the ability to dictate terms over other people. So we see this at all levels, how there's this craving or greed for power. We see it in even in small organizations, in corporations. Somebody wants to get control of the corporation and then use in devious ways to channel the funds into their own personal bank account out of greed. And then we see this in political systems and institutions, that craving for power, that desire for power. So this can be rooted in greed. So when that person is overcome by greed and then uses false pretexts to inflict suffering on others by killing, imprisonment, and so on, out of that drive for power, that is unwholesome. And so in this way, the text says, numerous bad, unwholesome qualities originate, born of greed, caused by greed, arisen from greed, conditioned by greed. Okay, then the next passage speaks about somebody who's motivated by hatred. So the person is overcome by hatred, with a mind obsessed by hatred, inflicts suffering upon others out of false pretexts. So we can see this, examples of this particularly when there's strong ethnic, racial, religious hatred, and then somebody comes into positions of power and then uses their power to inflict suffering upon others. So we have things like, we have the rhetoric going on right now about how people from Latin America are pouring across the border, bringing their worst elements into the United States: killers, drug dealers, prostitutes, gangsters, infecting our pure country, our wonderful country. We have expressions of racial hatred coming from, especially from the white supremacists. White is the best. People who are brown and black, they are inferior, they should be expelled or mistreated, and so forth. And then religious hatred, that, in fact, this is a source of so much conflict in the world between, I have to say, sadly, even Buddhists against Muslims in several countries, and even within a single religion, conflicts between, in Christianity, Protestants and Roman Catholics, in Islam between Sunni Muslims, Shiite Muslims, because there's perception of difference, and when there's perception of difference, then one feels fear and a threat from the difference, and then out of that perception of difference and fear and the sense of threat, there comes hatred, which motivates those in positions of power to inflict suffering upon others falsely through killing. One thinks of, in the South, well, I don't know if it still continues today, but the 1930s, 40s, 50s, the lynching of black people. Now they have the expression ethnic cleansing in certain countries that came into use in regard to the countries of the former Yugoslavia, when Yugoslavia broke up into Serbia, Croatia, and Bosnia. Then there were ethnic cleansing of people from different religion, the different ethnic groups and different religion from one region. They would be driven out and forced to migrate. And now we have that actually in Myanmar, in the state of Rakhine, where the Rohingya people have been ethnically cleansed out of the northern Rakhine state and forced to migrate into Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. Okay, so this is hatred. And then we have delusion. Actually, delusion underlies all of these types of violence. But maybe taking the specific, most specific case, we have a person who is deluded by the idea, they call this megalomania, that they are invincible, unconquerable, and they have the sort of right and the sort of divine destiny to become the world ruler. And so in that way they use their thirst for power, driven by that underlying delusion of invincibility, invulnerability, to push themselves up to the top and then use their power to harm, destroy, even to kill in vast numbers other people, or to confiscate their property, or to expel them, banish them from the country. Okay, so then the Buddha says that this person is called one, this is a little puzzling, called one who speaks at an improper time, who speaks falsely, who speaks what is unbeneficial, who speaks what is non-dharma, who speaks what is non-discipline. This is adhamma and avinaya. The reason why I say it's a little puzzling, because it focuses on what the person is saying rather than on what the person is doing. Okay, so continuing, the text says, why is such a person called one who speaks at an improper time, and so forth? Because this person inflicts suffering upon another under false pretexts, by killing, imprisonment, and so on, thinking, I am powerful, I want power. So this is the explanation. Thus, when spoken to in accordance with fact, in other words, when this person is correctly and truthfully reproached for their attitude, for their the kind of policies that they're enacting, so then this person despises the one, then we have in brackets, the one who reproaches him, and he does not admit his faults. And so when spoken to contrary to fact, he does not make an effort to unravel what is said to him for such and such a reason. This is untrue. This is contrary to fact. Therefore, such a person is called one who speaks at an improper time, who speaks falsely, and so on. Okay, such a person, overcome by these bad, unwholesome qualities, born of greed, hatred, and delusion, dwells in suffering in this present life with distress, anguish, and fever, and with the breakup of the body after death, a bad destination can be expected for that person. Actually, one has to look deeply into that person to see that they're dwelling and suffering in this present life. Because often people who are in these positions can rise up to, people who take those attitudes can rise up to positions of power, wealth, prestige, where everybody is kowtowing to them and following their decree, praising them, saying it's an honor to be serving you, an honor to be associated with you. And whatever they want, they have the wealth to acquire for themselves. They can benefit their family members. And yet, if you look deeply, you would see that they're very perpetually insecure. What would you say about that? True? False?
Unless they get caught, unless they have it come up as, it's just how it is in the real world. I would like to think that, but,
Yeah, it seems that they can be feeling quite contented, secure. And then the mind has a way of distorting one's understanding to sort of justify what one is doing, to think, like, this is the way of the world. We're not in a world where we benefit through cooperating with others, helping others, but the way of the world is that we each have to strive for our own personal benefit, no matter what the consequences are for others. And if others are not able to succeed in this brute struggle for survival, for dominance, that is their problem. That's their fault.
it's a shame.
Yeah.
Bhante, I was just thinking, so delusion can be the root for hatred and greed,
Yeah, right.
but can it be the other way around too? Hatred and greed gives rise to delusion?
One could say that hatred and greed, I would say, yeah, hatred and greed could lead. Delusion is the most fundamental of the three unwholesome roots, but greed and hatred can strengthen delusion and can strengthen delusion and then can push delusion to give rise to, I would say, distorted views, wrong views, which then serve to justify the greed and the hatred.
Yeah, because it seems to fall in line with what you just said about how the mind has a way of justifying what's going on.
Exactly,
saying
yeah. Okay, so let's just look at this somewhat specifically. Okay, so we'll take that case that so this is the self-made millionaire, multimillionaire, billionaire who by ruthlessly wiping out competitors, absorbing their businesses into his own business empire, comes out on top. Okay, so that is motivated by greed. And then to justify his ruthless, unscrupulous behavior, then he grasps hold of this view that, we're in this uncompromising, this struggle for survival where we can't compromise our own benefit in any way, otherwise our competitors are going to take advantage of us. So therefore I'm quite justified in wiping out my competitors. So that is a kind of deluded, distorted view which expresses delusion, which is being justified by the greed. And then in the case of, say, ethnic hatred, okay, somebody has usually this stems from, in the part of the ruler, it actually comes from a thirst for power. They want to gain power and solidify their grip on power. And so they try to mobilize the population behind them by creating dissension amongst people who might otherwise be living together harmoniously. And so they start spreading vicious falsehoods about usually minority or marginalized groups in order to mobilize hatred against that group. And in that way, they plant the seeds of delusion in the minds of others, rooted in hatred, sort of stemming from, first they plant the roots of hatred in the minds of others, and then they give justifications for that hatred by, fabricating false views and then propagating those false views. Like, say, in Nazi Germany, that the Jews are a corrupt, inferior race who are attempting to take over our pure Aryan German nation. Does somebody else have some comment? Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so now we have the Buddha illustrating this with a tree. Okay, so he gives the example of a tree that is choked and enveloped by 3 Maluva creepers. So I guess the Maluva creeper must be a kind of creeper that would grow in the forests, jungles of South Asia. And the creeper winds itself around the tree, and then it becomes, I think what it does is to send shoots into the tree. You know that kind of creeper? And then it draws out the sap of the tree so that the tree becomes weaker until the tree, under the weight of the creeper, the tree topples and collapses. Okay, so the tree is choked and enveloped by 3 Maluva creepers. And so then that tree meets with calamity, and disaster. Okay, so then the Buddha just fills this out again, that the person is overcome by the unwholesome states born of greed, hate, and delusion. And then they meet with suffering in this present life, and then we could say with the breakup of the body after death, a bad destination is to be expected for them. So what is a bad destination? It could be the hell realm. Probably for those who are really who behave in this way, the hell realm is most likely. Though there are other bad destinations, the animal realm and the preta realm. But for those who inflict through their behavior and through their speech a lot of suffering on others, I'd say it's likely to be the hell realm. Okay, then we have the positive side of the discourse. So we have the 3 wholesome roots. So these wholesome roots: non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. So for some reason, the Indian tradition in general prefers to use negative terminology, but when we have these expressions, we should see that they're connected with certain positive qualities. So if we want to find positive qualities that are related to non-greed, what would be some of these positive qualities? Okay, so the most obvious is generosity.
Openness.
Openness. What does openness mean?
Means you are not trying to grasping anything.
That you're not?
You are not trying to grasp or grasping anything.
Okay,
Open.
so we could say non-grasping?
Yes, sure.
But that's almost like non-greed. Yeah.
But I thought you said you want a positive word.
Yeah, that's right. So let's put openness. It's a little vague exactly what's meant. I say that those are actually more closely connected with the next one. So we could put the dosa as non-hatred. So we say loving kindness, compassion, generosity, openness. Okay. And you were going to say? I'd say that's good. Okay, contentment. Something else related to this?
Bhante, mudita, being happy for others' achievements?
Maybe mudita is more related to a non-hatred.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, anyway, we have enough. Contentment, simplicity of lifestyle.
I was going to say steadiness, but I don't know if that is. Steadiness, stability maybe.
Steadiness.
Stability, it's not quite the right word.
Anyway, we could say that we have enough simplicity of lifestyle, but that doesn't mean you should be a simpleton. Okay, and then adosa, non-hatred, loving kindness, compassion, mudita, this is joy with others. And then amoha, non-delusion, what would be the qualities connected with non-delusion? Okay, equanimity, but the most important quality connected with non-delusion, positive expression for non-delusion.
Faith?
Yeah, wisdom. You could say the equanimity comes from wisdom. I wonder why the Buddhist texts always use the negative expressions rather than the positive expressions. Is there a reason for that?
Is it just a function of the language? You would know that. No, I mean, seriously, language is a really, it's the construction of the pattern. I've often wondered that.
Well, there are these positive terms within the language, like generosity would be chaga, renunciation, nekama, contentment is santuti or santosa, simplicity would be maybe salahukavuti, simplicity of lifestyle. Then, of course, for loving kindness, we have metta, compassion, karuna. Yeah, maybe I'm just guessing. I don't have a definite answer for this.
I always wonder the same question.
Yeah.
So I come up, my answer is anything positive is so easy for a worldling to grasp upon. So that that alone will create craving. But anything positive is so easy for anything negative, we want to get rid of.
Yeah. Okay, that seems to be a good answer. I'm not saying it's the exclusively correct answer. So he said that the worldly mind tends to grasp on anything positive, and then even if it's good. And somebody else was going to say, okay, Ravi.
Regarding amoha, can meditation be included under that? Because that leads to equanimity and wisdom. Because
well, I say meditation is a practice, but it's not a quality in itself.
Mm-hmm. Because sometimes they say alobha, adasya, amoha as dana, sila, bhavana, right? The positive qualities. So bhavana means meditation.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say that bhavana itself, I say it's a practice, but not so much a quality.
Yeah, it is a process. You're right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
we have enough here.
Okay.
Now I want to get to the question.
Yeah, okay.
Why are these expressed negatively? I think, Ken, you had a question. And take the microphone, please.
I was thinking not having the negatives itself
Yeah.
is a positive because your mind is calmer, clearer.
Okay, that's a good so greed, hatred, and delusion are negative in the sense of being unwholesome. So not having the unwholesome itself is a positive state. And somebody else had? Okay, Sandy.
I think but the Buddha wants us to see dukkha through the negativity of those stuff.
To see dukkha through the negative terms, alobha, dosa, moha.
Yeah. When we see the negative, then we see dukkha.
I'm not quite sure that I get the point. And Asmund?
I'm thinking that dukkha is what needs to be abandoned, and you represent dukkha negatively. I think that's what she was.
So you're saying a similar thing to Sandy?
Yes. Because dukkha is the problem or negativity that's to be expressed negatively.
Okay, so maybe there's some strength to that explanation. And Boaz?
I think that because the final goal is nibbana, and nibbana is the non-existence of.
And nibbana is what?
Is that non-existence of greed, hatred,
actually,
and
that's a very good answer. That's actually a very good answer. And it's said that nibbana is raga kaya, dosa kaya, moha kaya. So it's the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion. And so then the Buddha will give the qualities as the wholesome roots. These are the roots to be cultivated in order to attain nibbana. So those roots would be non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. And Stephen, did you have your hand?
Oh, I think I was going to say something similar. But first of all, I think, isn't it true in Pali that not all the negated words are negative words, right?
Well, that is
like
true in this case.
Appamada is the positive form, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems like that lobha, dosa, moha are like the default.
Yeah.
And so we need to negate what's there already.
Yeah. Okay, so those are good answers. And what I would also add is that probably if the Buddha were to specify the three wholesome roots as being generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom, maybe those would be too specific, particularly with regard to the first two, whereas using alobha could incorporate a lot of positive qualities in which lobha is absent. For example, generosity and renunciation and contentment. So these three are quite different, but they all share in alobha. So if the Buddha said generosity is a wholesome root, then it wouldn't include renunciation or contentment. And similarly, if he mentioned renunciation, then it wouldn't include generosity and contentment. But by using non-greed, then one could sort of incorporate under non-greed all of the positive qualities that are in some way involve the absence of greed. And similarly with non-hatred. And your name is? So you're Ken from Beacon, right?
Ken from Beacon.
Yeah.
It also seems that you can be both greedy and generous at the same time by accumulating great wealth and then making very visible donations to build up your sense of self. And the statements in the negative exclude that.
Actually, that's a good point as well. Even though, like, technically in the Abhidhamma system, generosity and greed don't occur simultaneously, but a person can have, both greed or attachment and generosity. And so by underscoring the positive quality as being non-greed, then it has a wider scope simply than generosity. It means the giving up of all kinds of greed and attachment.
Exactly, and I think it goes as well for hatred. If we start making rules about who we can hate and who we are going to love, that's also not allowed in the negative form.
Yeah.
It's just hatred is just taken out.
Okay, so that's a good point. Okay, let us move on then. Okay, so whatever non-greed occurs is wholesome. Whatever deed one without greed performs by way of body, speech, and mind is also wholesome. And so, actually, this shows in a way, or this highlights a positive aspect of non-greed, that the person without greed will act with body, speech, and mind, but their action it's not just sitting immobile thinking, I don't have greed, I don't have hatred, I don't have delusion, therefore I don't do anything. But the person will act, but they'll act in ways they'll engage in wholesome actions by way of body, speech, and mind. And their actions will be wholesome. And in fact, when it comes to the wholesome side, then we have the positive quality is given as kusala, in this case. And then the absence of the wholesome, what is unwholesome, what is bad, is akusala, which is sometimes sort of glosed as papaka, bad. Okay, so when one without greed and so on, not obsessed by it, does not inflict suffering on another under false pretext, that too is wholesome. And thus numerous wholesome qualities originate born of non-greed. So we have here aneka kusala dhamma, many wholesome qualities originate born of non-greed, caused by non-greed, and so forth. Similarly, many wholesome qualities originate born of non-hatred, caused by non-hatred, and many wholesome qualities originate born of non-delusion, caused by non-delusion. Okay, so then such a person is called one who speaks at the proper time, who speaks in accordance with fact, who speaks what is beneficial, who speaks on Dhamma, who speaks on discipline. Okay, so why so? So this person does not inflict suffering upon another under false pretexts. And so thus when spoken to in accordance with fact, he admits his faults and does not despise one who reproaches him. Okay, when spoken to contrary to fact, he makes an effort to unravel what is said to him, saying that that is untrue, that is contrary to fact. Therefore, such a person is called one who speaks at the proper time, and so forth. Okay, so such a person has abandoned the bad, unwholesome qualities born of greed, hate, and delusion. He dwells happily in this very life without distress, anger, or fever, and in this very life he attains nibbana. Actually, that is said of the person who is actually truly abandoned the unwholesome qualities born of greed, hatred, and delusion, cut them off at the root. So this is ending with, or culminating in the description of the Arahat, the one without greed, hatred, and delusion, who has actually eradicated greed, hatred, and delusion. But let's take the case of the ordinary person, not an Arhat, who is still cultivating the qualities associated with non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. So we're not yet arahats, but still we are working to develop generosity, renunciation, loving kindness, compassion, to increase our wisdom. And so as we're doing so, can we say that we're dwelling happily in this very life? Yeah. What do you think? You're not pushing yourself into positions of dominance in the corporate world, or maybe some of you are, I don't know. Or taking over states and governments through unscrupulous means to establish a tyranny. So can you still dwell happily in this present life? What do you think? Carolyn, what do you think? Allison, what do you think? Yes and no. Please take the microphone.
If I'm an ordinary person,
yeah,
that means I still have a greed and hatred and delusion. If I try to live a life like that, but occasionally my greed and hatred and delusion will come up. Yeah. So I'm struggling, I will be struggling between happiness and unhappiness and satisfaction and dissatisfaction and all that stuff.
Okay, but the reason why the unhappiness is coming up, the suffering, is because in that case you're giving way to greed, hatred, and delusion. But now let us say that you're maybe quite skillful in overcoming at least the grosser forms of greed, hatred, and delusion, and living most of the time without this compulsive, dominant greed, without this explosive hatred, without this dark and heavy delusion. So in that case, would you be living happily or unhappily?
I still will answer yes and no. I will be living lighter.
Yeah.
Unless I'm completely enlightened.
Yeah, we're not taking that case. We're taking a case of an ordinary person who's... Any other opinion? Okay, Ken. We have two Kens, so we say...
Yeah, I would give it an unqualified yes, but that happiness is a conditioned state, and so yeah. Also saying yes and no, more yeah. Like it comes and goes.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So it's my experience meditation, and the practice is there are times when it holds great strength, yeah. Leading to times of great happiness, yeah. And then sometimes those other conditions arise, creating less happy.
Yeah, okay. Living. But I think what you would see is that, or what I would say is that when the greed, hatred, and delusion are held in abeyance, then there's a greater happiness. But when the greed, hatred, and delusion, the subtle sort of anusayas, the latent tendencies, when they become active, even though you're making the effort to overcome greed, hate, and delusion, but they still become active, that is what brings the, how does the text say, the unhappiness, the distress, the anguish. Somebody else has some opinion about this? Osmond, what would you say? Take the microphone.
Basically, I think the same thing you just explained. It depends on certain times when your absence of greed, hatred, and delusion is permanent.
Yeah. So that's my opinion. And Carolyn?
This may sound odd, but I think then if like a negative thing, the negative parts start arising, like because of a practice we have, there's a happiness that you caught it and saw it and can change it.
Oh, the happiness that you saw it and caught it.
Yeah, like
Or the
like
fact that you
like
saw
say
it
like a
and
little
caught
bit
it,
of
and that you're working to overcome it is
Yeah.
what brings happiness.
yes.
Yeah, okay, so these are some good observations. And what I would just add to this, actually I have it someplace on this computer. I don't want to open it now, it's like 70 pages, but a report came out a few weeks ago. I think it's from the United Nations, on the study of different countries according to a happiness index, to rate different countries according to the degree of happiness that one could expect by living within those countries. And it found that those countries in which there is the greatest degree of sense of social solidarity, the greatest degree of what they call the social services provided by the government to people, like universal health care, unemployment compensation, what's this? Maternity leave, relatively long periods of maternity leave, generous vacation time, leave, sick leave at work, did I say unemployment compensation, and so forth. Those are the countries with the greatest degree of happiness on this scale, whereas those countries in which the government is relatively miserly in providing help to people who are unemployed, in which is dominated by corporate private health insurance or no health insurance at all, in which there's internal conflicts, lack of social solidarity, those are the countries in which there's less degree of happiness. And I think on that scale, the United States came not at the top, somewhere around position number in the high 30s, like 39, something like that. The countries with the highest degree of happiness would be the Nordic countries. Norway, I think Finland, Norway, Denmark. Sweden was not that high, I think. The Netherlands. Of course, those countries have high degrees of social services and welfare provisions for people. I only read the summary of the report. I have to get back and to read the whole report. Okay, it's any question? I think we're coming, we have to finish with the simile. Okay, so we have a tree that's choked and enveloped by these 3 Malava creepers. So this is illustrating the Arahat. So then a man comes along with a shovel and a basket. He cuts down the creepers at the root, digs them up, pulls out the roots, even the fine rootlets. Then he cuts the creepers into pieces, splits the pieces, reduces them to slivers. He dries them, burns them in a fire, reduces them to ashes, and then winnows the ashes in a strong wind, or lets them be carried away by the swift current of a river. So this is like utterly destroying even the very fabric of that Malava creeper, those Malava creepers, so that they can no longer grow again. So that illustrates the actual eradication of the unwholesome roots. And so then this is a person, and so too such a person has abandoned the bad unwholesome qualities born of greed, hate, and delusion, cut them off at the root and so forth, obliterated them so they are no more subject to future arising. So this person dwells happily in this very life, and in this very life he attains parinibbana, the ultimate nibbana. So those are the 3 wholesome roots carried to their full culmination. Okay, so that is Sutta number 69. Well, I was going to do 69 to go through it quickly and then focus on Sutta number 70. But we'll have to take that the next time. And the next class will have to be in May, the beginning of May, because next week we have a retreat for the counselors here, And then the week after that, we have the Buddhist Global Relief. We have our annual projects meeting. So the next class will be May 4th, May 5th? You look on the schedule of classes. And then we'll take the Sutta on the Uposatha, which is very important sutta for lay Buddhist practice. And speaking about the weekend, do you have the brochure, any of those brochures? Not the brochure, I'm sorry, the posters. Yeah, so this is again, I have to do a promotion. I think everybody has already heard about this, but I'll mention again, that on October 28th, our organization, Buddhist Global Relief, will have the concert to feed the hungry. This is one of our major fundraising events of the year and publicity events of the year. So this is for the purpose of acquiring funds to provide assistance to poor communities around the world who are suffering, especially from chronic hunger and malnutrition. And the funds that come in through an event like this will not only provide direct food aid, but will promote education of poor children around the world, including Southeast Asia, South Asia, Mongolia, Africa, Haiti, Latin America. Education of poor children, right livelihood opportunities for women, and environmentally sustainable agriculture. And so these are some posters. If you have a Dhamma center, monastery, well, this is another monastery, Dhamma center, Sangha group, you could take a poster to put it up on the bulletin board. And then these are just postcards with information about the concert. So we'll leave these here. And you could take even some more postcards if you have some friends who might be interested. And then please, of course, come to the concert yourself. And if you can't come, you could still support the concert through a donation. Okay, so let us end for the day with the sharing of the merits. So we share the merits from the class with the Dhamma protecting deities, the Nagas, the Bhutas and fair spirits, and then with all sentient beings. Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Sasanang Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanang Akasata Chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mang Parang Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Deva Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Okay, Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Bhuta Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Satanomodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavagopadaya Vichihetato Etantare Satakayupapanna Rupya Rupicha Sanya Sanino Dukha Pamuchantu Pusantu Niputing. Yeah, maybe something else I should have mentioned. Oh yeah, two things, yeah. First, we could have a Q&A session after the class, let's say 12:15 here. And then also I should mention in May there'll be a 7-day insight meditation retreat conducted by Venerable Dhammajiva, the meditation master from Sri Lanka. That will be from May 21st to May 28th. And if you go to the Bao's website, you'll find, we call this a thumbnail poster about the retreat. And if you click on that, then it will take you to a registration form. So it's good to register in advance if you are able to attend that retreat. Okay, so let us end for the day, for the morning. Excuse me? What date is that? What date is it? It's May 17th. Yeah, that's a Friday.